Olá, galera! Tudo bom? Vamos continuar assistindo aquele vídeo que ele estava indo para um lugar bem obscuro, sinistro. Então decidi parar aquele dia, mas vamos continuar agora para ver a conclusão. Mas assim, até agora eu achei que o começo do vídeo foi interessante, mas a partir do momento que ele começa a falar sobre as questões trans em si, ele está seguindo a argumentação da J.K. Rowling, né? O viés dele é aquele mesmo. Ah, inclusive, vamos ver os comentários da última live, que eu achei algumas coisas interessantes lá. Só um minutinho pra eu abrir aqui. O Nifan Fernandes disse: esse ranço com a J.K. começou bem depois da entrevista com a Oprah e depois do lançamento do primeiro Animais Fantásticos. Acho que foi um pouco antes, assim, mas foi por essa época mesmo. Deve ter começado lá pra 2018, quando o pessoal começou a fuçar o Twitter dela e tal, e quem ela dava likes. Eu simplesmente acho que ela está certa em alguns pontos e errada em outros, o que não retira o crédito pra mim dela ser uma escritora genial. O Cadu diz: também amo esse vídeo da Natalie, Igor. Já vi diversas vezes, acho uma ótima ideia assistir ele em live. Vamos assistir o vídeo da Natalie. Inclusive, eu quero assistir com a Carol e a Larissa, da equipe da Casa Elefante, porque elas também são fãs da Natalie. E a Lorena também. É, Rafael e Rafael F. disse: Igor, sobre os casos de predadores se passando por trans para acessar banheiros, realmente tem poucos casos. Mas o que a JK diz é justamente que os casos podem aumentar caso a lei de autoidentificação passe. Eu não sei se concordo totalmente com ela, mas acho que precisa levar em consideração que a preocupação dela e das feministas radicais é que isso se torne comum e mais frequente devido às legislações de autoidentificação, e não que o problema seja o número de casos atuais. Eu acho uma preocupação coerente para as mulheres, mas também acho complicado tentar prever o futuro, então não tenho muita opinião formada. É que no outro vídeo eu ainda falei, né? Aqui no Brasil é muito parecido com o que se tornaria a legislação britânica caso fosse aceito aqui essa reforma do Gender Recognition Act que a J.K. Rowling se opõe. E aqui a gente não vê isso acontecendo com mais frequência que antes. Ou pelo menos eu não estou ciente de estudos que demonstrem isso. Mas é um problema que não chega a gente, né? Eu não sei se talvez possa ser argumentado que a mídia está comprada pelo movimento trans, blá, blá, blá. Mas aí começa a entrar num negócio de conspiração, né? Que é meio estranho. Aí eu tava ouvindo o último episódio do Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, né? Que é aquele podcast que uma jornalista tá fazendo com a Rowling sobre esse assunto. E lá ela falou um argumento que eu ainda não tinha parado para pensar sobre ele. Que a Megan faz justamente essa pergunta. Ó o Danilo. Oi, Iguinho, você fica linda com a luz azul de fundo. Obrigado, Danilo. O Vitor. Oi, Ingo. Amigo, você faz uma recapitulação rápida para quem perdeu a última live? Faço. Peraí. O Cadu disse: oi, Igor. Oi, Cadu. Li seu comentário agora há pouco. Então, no podcast, a Rowling fala o seguinte. A, a moça que está entrevistando ela pergunta: os predadores sexuais eles não podem entrar nos banheiros? Por que se preocupar tanto com o fato deles poderem tirar um certificado de gênero? Alguma coisa assim, né? É meio que o argumento que eu mesmo fiz contra um argumento que foi colocado aí nos comentários da última live, né? Que alguém falou é, sobre os predadores usarem esse negócio da autoidentificação como um jeito de entrar nos banheiros. Eu falei, mas o predador ele vai fazer o que ele quiser, né? independente de autorização ou não, até porque o ato predatório ele já é criminoso, né, em si. Então ele não ia querer simplesmente burlar uma regra e cometer um crime mesmo assim. Mas a Rowling fala uma coisa se, que eu achei muito interessante e eu não tinha pensado por esse lado. Se a gente é, transformar em aceitável que as pessoas se auto-identifiquem, então as pessoas vão se sentir inibidas de agir contra uma pessoa no banheiro que pode fazer alguma coisa, sabe? Por exemplo, se um homem entra no banheiro das mulheres, as mulheres vão ficar sem saber o que fazer porque pode ser que ele seja trans, uma mulher trans, entendeu? Porque a Rowling ela não fala contra todas as pessoas trans, né? Ela fala contra as pessoas trans que não transicionam medicamente, medicinalmente, sei lá. Então, é contra esse tipo de situação, né, que ela fala. E aí é interessante esse ponto de vista. Eu não parei muito para pensar sobre isso, mas quando ela respondeu, eu pensei assim, nossa, eu nunca vi esse argumento. Parece ser uma novidade, parece ir para um caminho diferente das argumentações TERF, sabe? Então eu achei que faz um pouco de sentido. Depois vocês comentem o que vocês acham. Continuando os comentários. Esse vídeo do Rick realmente é meio extremista contra o movimento transativista, mas eu achei interessante assistir inteiro, porque muita coisa eu concordei e outras não. A questão do sexo versus gênero é muito complicada e complexa, e os interesses do movimento trans entram em conflito com os das feministas e gays e lésbicas. Conflito precisa de debate, conversa, questionamentos, mas o debate não pode ser feito porque o próprio debate é considerado preconceituoso. Fica difícil. Não concordei 100% com o Rick, mas achei importante ver o vídeo todo. Por isso que nós vamos continuar a ver. Mas resumindo o outro vídeo, né? No outro vídeo, na outra live que a gente fez, o Rick, que é o cara que fez esse vídeo, começa fazendo uma retrospectiva da forma como o público tratou a J.K. Rowling nos últimos anos. Como se ela fosse maluca, estivesse querendo trocar informações da série de Harry Potter, falando que o Dumbledore era gay só pra ser como se ela fosse uma pseudo progressista e tal. E aí partiu pro negócio do ativismo trans. E quando começou a falar sobre isso, começou a falar sobre as violências, né? E a forma meio exageradas que ele enxerga das pessoas trans tratarem o assunto das TERFs, né? E aí eu parei porque tava. Primeiro que já tava com quase 2 horas de vídeo, e outra que tava meio pesado. Mas vamos continuar então. Aqui ele vai começar a falar sobre transição de crianças e adolescentes. Esse é um assunto que eu acho que, para mim, eu precisaria de muita conversa ainda para se eu fosse concordar, né, que é ok transicionar crianças. Mas eu ainda não tenho opinião formada, assim. O meu instinto é dizer que eu acho que é errado, porque a gente sabe que a imaturidade pode levar as pessoas a fazerem coisas que elas se arrependem, né? Mas aí precisaria de dados, pesquisa para saber em que nível isso acontece, né? Blá, blá, blá. Mas vamos ver o que ele tem para falar.
area where Rowling raises issues is with transitioning kids. And again, what she says here is so mild and common sense that if you actually bother to read it, it's incredible anybody can actually find something in her words to be offended by. She says clearly that she thinks transitioning is right for some people, but she points out correctly that studies show that when young kids say they have gender dysphoria, if they don't transition, 60 to 90% of them will soon grow out of it. Literally every human who has ever lived and who has gone through puberty went through a period where they were uncomfortable uncomfortable with their own body and confused about how they were changing. But what's happening now is that we're telling kids that natural discomfort is a sign that they might be the wrong gender, which is absolutely insane. Of course, kids know that the discomfort that they feel is real, but they have no idea how they'll feel about their bodies in a few years and no way of being able to understand the long-term implications of permanent medical interventions. We all accept that kids aren't old enough to drive or drink or even buy cigarettes, but for some reason when it comes to gender and sex issues that they couldn't possibly understand, we're supposed to immediately take them at their word, and to say that maybe they should wait a few years to see how they'll feel about it then is considered child abuse. The only rationale for this absurd position is the frequently made claim that if they aren't allowed to transition, their distress will be so great that they'll kill themselves. This is emotional blackmail that's intended to force parents to ignore their reservations out of fear of killing their kid. It's a fucked up and abusive way to force somebody's hand, and there's also zero evidence that it's true. It's only been in the last few years that we've started offering these kind of medical interventions to kids on a large scale, but now suddenly they're all going to kill themselves if they can't do it. It's like a kid threatening to kill himself if he gets an iPhone that's 2 years old instead of the newest one. If this was true, and if the gender identities of these kids are an innate characteristic, then there should have been just as many kids like this a decade ago. So was there a corresponding number of additional suicides back then when they couldn't get gender medical interventions? Obviously there wasn't. Actually, studies show that in the past few years, mental illness among kids and teens has been skyrocketing, not going down, even as more of them have these treatments whose justification is predicated on them supposedly having the opposite effect. Studies show an increase in suicide after transition, not a decrease. Trans activists like showing a few studies that show that suicidal inclinations are higher in groups of kids claiming to be trans than in kids who aren't, but the kids claiming to be trans also have vastly higher instances of other mental illnesses, and if you adjust the study to compare them to non-trans kids who also have similar mental illnesses, then the rate of suicidal behaviors becomes much more similar. In other words, the rate of suicidal behaviors corresponds to the mental illnesses, not to whether or not the kid identifies as trans. It's ridiculous to think that a well-adjusted kid could understand and consent to permanent medical procedures like these, and it's exponentially more ridiculous to think that an especially distraught and confused kid suffering from all these other mental issues could understand and consent. Among the kids claiming to be trans, the number of them who also have other mental illnesses or autism or various other comorbidities is vastly disproportionate. Trans activists will tell you that they're suffering from these other issues because of the way that society treats them for being trans, but I wasn't aware that you can make somebody autistic by being mean to them. When confronted with the recent sudden huge increase in kids identifying as trans, which seems like obvious evidence of a social contagion, TRAs will say that there were always that many trans kids, it's just that now they're more likely to come out because society is more accepting. Then in the very next breath, they'll say that all these kids have astronomical levels of mental illness because of how society is not accepting, that they're facing unprecedented hostility and persecution and actual genocide. Good luck trying to find a way to reconcile those two statements because you can't. Neither is backed by evidence. Obviously, it makes more sense in the 60 to 90% of kids who will eventually stop identifying as trans to conclude that them thinking that they might be trans was a result of their anxiety and depression and trauma and other issues, as opposed to those issues being caused by them being trans. They're looking for a way to explain the real difficulties that they're having, and we're selling them an all-purpose solution where if they just take some hormones and amputate the right body parts, everything will be better. They look at themselves and say that, like every kid in history, it's true that they're not comfortable with their bodies, and so to the mind of a kid, this makes perfect sense. Rowling also points out in her essay that the majority of youths identifying.
Bom, isso é um assunto muito interessante para mim, porque a disforia de gênero, ela não é uma coisa específica de pessoas trans. Sabe, eu não acho que apenas pessoas trans sintam disforia de gênero. Logo, a transição não é um tratamento para disforia de gênero. A transição é tratamento para uma outra coisa. A disforia de gênero ela pode ser um sintoma do fato da pessoa ser trans. Por exemplo, quando eu era adolescente, estava passando pela puberdade, começaram a crescer pelos onde antes não tinha, eu sentia um desconforto muito grande e até me depilava porque eu achava que estava errado, sabe? E para mim isso é, pode ser categorizado como disforia de gênero. Hoje em dia, que eu tenho 30 anos, infelizmente, tá tudo bem. Mas eu acho que existem pessoas que esse sentimento nunca passa. E tem a ver com muito mais coisa, além do seu corpo, né? Também com a sua mente, não sei o que, não sei o que. E isso pode ser um sintoma para te fazer querer transicionar. E perdi a linha do raciocínio. É... O que ele tava falando no vídeo mesmo? Ah, sim. Então. E eu acho problemático pegar todo mundo que sente algum tipo de desconforto sobre sua sexualidade, sobre sua aparência física, sobre sua posição social, sei lá, e falar para elas que a resposta é a transição. Eu vejo muita gente argumentando que isso acontece com certa frequência em clínicas psicológicas com adolescentes. É lógico que a intenção é ótima, é a melhor de todas desses profissionais, né? Eles estão querendo resolver um problema. Mas será que não estão promovendo um tratamento apressadamente demais? Será que não poderia ser outra coisa? Por exemplo, eu li uma história de uma menina que detransicionou e percebeu que o que ela tinha, na verdade, era problema com o corpo dela no sentido de gordofobia, essas coisas de ansiedade mesmo. E ela acreditou quando os médicos sugeriram que ela poderia ser trans. Então, não sei. Eu acho que outra coisa que a gente precisa debater, que a gente precisa de pesquisa, sabe? Que não adianta nada a gente falar. Parem de falar sobre isso. Isso é transfobia considerar tal problema, sabe? E eu não sinto que a Rowling tá falando de uma forma agressiva contra as pessoas trans. Eu sinto que ela tá fazendo justamente isso, conversando, é, iniciando ou tentando iniciar ou participando de um debate que precisa acontecer na minha concepção. Mesmo que ela esteja errada. Eu não acho que ela tá certa. Em algumas coisas eu discordo dela. Mas eu acho que no mundo em que não existem pessoas que a gente discorda, não tem como evoluir, né? Acho que a gente evolui com o debate. O Rafael disse: o que eu acho problemático é a J.K. associar os casos de assédio e abuso em banheiro à população trans, como se todos fossem ter essa conduta. Mas ela diria que ela não está associando pessoas trans a essa conduta, né? Ela diria que ela está falando que pessoas podem se utilizar da facilidade que existiria para se considerar um homem, uma mulher, para para fazer, para cometer assédio em banheiros. Então ela diria: não, as pessoas trans têm todo, a mulher trans, por exemplo, tem todo o direito de usar o banheiro feminino. Mas a gente tem que manter certa, a gente tem que ter segurança do gênero dessa pessoa antes de deixar que ela se identifique assim oficialmente. Porque senão pode ser que um homem que queira assediar uma mulher pode entrar no banheiro feminino só simplesmente para falar que falando que é uma mulher. Mas dá margem, né? Ah, mas dá margem para interpretação. O meu problema, o que eu tô querendo analisar aqui é o que ela disse, não o que ela pode como as pessoas podem interpretar, né? Então, eu acho que esse é um dos problemas da questão toda, assim. As pessoas estão interpretando o que querem do que ela fala e não o que ela fala, né? É, voltando a falar sobre as crianças e adolescentes, né? Eu tenho uma sensação como se as pessoas tratassem o termo identidade com peso tão forte na internet, assim, ah, a minha identidade é essa, vocês não podem falar sobre ela. Ou você fala que ela é válida, ou você não fala sobre ela. E não é assim, né? A gente passou por milênios em que a identidade era um fator agregador de muitas outras coisas na personalidade da pessoa. E agora virou um tabu, sabe? Falar sobre a identidade das pessoas. Enfim, vamos continuar.
As trans used to be male, and now in just the last few years it's flipped with something like a 4,000% increase in trans identifying girls. Does it make more sense that this huge percentage of the young female population was always trans but just closeted until a few years ago, even though now trans youths are supposedly facing unprecedented persecution? Or does it maybe make more sense that the current trend is more appealing to girls because they don't like the way that society treats girls and the expectations placed on them, so their resultant anxiety and depression makes them think that maybe they'd be happier as boys? You would think that if so many girls are unhappy with how society treats them due to their sex, the progressive point of view would be that we should treat girls and women better, not to cut off their breasts and tell them that if they want equal treatment that they have to act more like men. Even though it's only been a few years since we've been allowing these kids to transition at such young ages, there's already a large and increasing number of them detransitioning, and in many cases starting to sue the medical institutions that they say rushed them into transitioning when they were confused and at their lowest and couldn't possibly have given informed consent. It's worth it to read the stories by the people detransitioning to understand the effects that these medical transitions had on their bodies. Especially evil is the idea that things like puberty blockers are just totally harmless and reversible. As many people have pointed out, we're now giving young kids the same dangerous medications that we used to use to chemically castrate sex offenders. They've already found a host of side effects that could be related to this, from bone damage to cancer, but just common sense should tell you that stopping somebody's body from going through normal puberty will prevent their body systems from developing properly.
O senso comum não pode te ajudar, moço. Não usa isso como argumento, pelo amor de Deus.
Even besides common sense, and if we didn't have mounting evidence of the medical consequences already, which we do, it would still be a lie to claim that we know that it's safe, because we haven't been doing this to kids long enough to have any data on the long-term effects. They do know that in most cases it causes permanent infertility and loss of sexual function. One trans doctor said that none of her patients who did this were ever able to achieve orgasm as adults. I would guess that in 50 years, when they see the eventual effects, it will be much more of a horror show.
Every single child who was, or adolescent who was truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero. These are just assigned male at birth, so trans feminine, and it's because they never in their lives are exposed to testosterone. We don't know. They're going to have this sensation. There's no question about that. But are they going to be able to achieve sexual satisfaction? It's important in relationships. And I know that from my work with female genital mutilation survivors, that the lack of being able to be intimate with a partner is very important. And so this is what really raised the red flag for me, is to say, look, we need to have our eyes open about it.
So when we do know how dangerous it is, and we know that if we just let kids grow up normally, most of them would soon become comfortable with their bodies anyway, what is the incentive to keep pushing for more and more kids to do this, to try to threaten parents with invented claims that their kids will kill themselves if they can't? There is a financial incentive, because once people start down this path, it's a lifetime of expensive medication and surgeries, and the complication rates from the surgeries are often astronomical. You don't just go in and have the operation and then it's done. Afterward, it requires a lifetime of maintenance, which detransitioners will also tell you about. But what I'm more interested in is why trans activists are so invested in this. I think the obvious reason is that they know, with all the various issues they're pushing, they're asking for enormous concessions and accommodations, and it makes less sense if we're talking about the very small number of people who would be what we considered transsexuals just a few years ago. That's why we've got this concept now of the trans umbrella, where anybody who doesn't fit into rigid 1950s American stereotypes about gender roles is now suddenly labeled as some variety of trans. When you apply the label trans to every girl who ever had a short haircut and every boy who ever watched a musical, suddenly, go figure, there are a lot more trans people. This is a concerted effort to break down language to force as many people as possible to feel like this is an issue about them too, because that's a trans activist figure that they'll get the broadest support. They try to include people with intersex conditions under their trans umbrella because they're using intersex people as props that they can point to say, see, there aren't just two genders, it's a magical spectrum with hundreds of genders. But in reality, although there's a thoroughly discredited statistic that 1.7% of people are some variety of intersex, the real number of intersex people is more like 0.018%. And the thing is that this small population of people have congenital conditions, not divergent quote-unquote gender identities, and you can find many of them saying that they don't appreciate their physical problems being conflated with gender ideology. Saying that this 0.018% of people with congenital conditions proves that humans aren't a sexually dimorphic species is like saying that some people being born with an extra toe means that humans don't have 10 toes. It's a nonsense analogy. When I say that gender ideology and trying to expand this trans umbrella is just about regressive stereotypes about behavior, that's exactly what it is, and trans activists will tell you that themselves, but they won't have the self-awareness to realize that that's what they're saying. When they posit that gender doesn't have any relationship to our physical bodies, they'll say that the gender people are assigned is a social construct based on expectations about how the sexes should behave, leaving aside for a moment the stupid idea that people are assigned a gender at birth, because nobody has ever been assigned a gender. Doctors just make a factual observation about their bodies for medical purposes. But beside that...
Não, né? Eles fazem uma observação sobre o sexo do bebê e a partir disso se define o gênero daquele ser humano. O gênero e o sexo são coisas separadas, né? E o que as pessoas trans estão querendo, pelo menos as pessoas trans acadêmicas, né? Elas estão querendo dizer é que o gênero e o sexo eles não precisam ser associados. E que o sexo, como ele é visto na sociedade, ele é irrealista. Porque existem muitas formas de se expressar o seu sexo, né? Através do gênero. Bom.
The question is, if they think that gender is socially constructed, then how can they also say that somebody's gender is an innate and immutable characteristic that must be respected? How can you say that there's no definition of what a woman is, and then also say that it's a fact that somebody is a woman? How the...
Pois é, eu acho que ele tá com tem uns pontos bons aqui nesse vídeo, que são, acho que sintomas do fato do movimento trans e dos estudos sobre transgeneridade, transexualidade serem muito novos, né? Basicamente, anos 80 começou. Então faz muito pouco tempo que se estuda, que se pensa sobre isso. Então, é lógico que as pessoas não vão ter a mesma base sólida de pensamento que, por exemplo, as pessoas têm sobre questões raciais, né? Porque é uma coisa nova, uma coisa que as pessoas ainda estão sentindo, né? Como que vai ser? Qual que é a linha de raciocínio? Qual que é o método de se pensar? Como que a gente se comporta nos aspectos políticos? Como a gente se comporta nos aspectos sociais e tal. Eu acho que faz sentido, mas realmente tem coisas que se contradizem que a gente precisa apontar, porque isso vai melhorar a teoria queer, não vai querer desmontar ela, né?
They'll answer this is to say that gender is different than gender identity. Gender is a socially constructed set of expectations, and a person's gender identity is how they relate to those expectations. So then if you think about that for 2 seconds, then you'll see that What they're saying is that gender is stereotypes about sex, and gender identity is whether or not you fit with those stereotypes. In other words, they're saying exactly what I said. It's an obsession with stereotypes, but they just dress it up in pseudo-academic language to throw the yokels off the track. So what gay people used to say, and what I used to say being a gay activist kid back in my youth, was that if somebody didn't conform to gender stereotypes, if a little girl liked toy trucks and a little boy wanted to play with a Barbie, what we would have said was, leave them alone, let them be themselves. We would have said, if a boy wants to play with a Barbie, or if a man wants to act in a way that regressive stereotypes would deem feminine, we would have said, that doesn't make him any less of a man. We would have said, you're just married to stereotypes and it's homophobic. Now, what we're told is progressive is that if a girl wants to play with a truck, that means that she probably isn't a girl at all.
Tem problema aí nessa forma como as pessoas escolhem falar sobre a transexualidade, transgeneridade, né? Quando eu era criança eu gostava muito de brincar de coisas masculinas, então, portanto, eu desde criança era trans. Eu acho que mais uma vez é um sintoma da infância desse assunto, sabe? Eu acho que quanto mais a gente for evoluindo, mais a gente vai entendendo como que a gente pode expressar a nossa identidade sem essas contradições, né?
Not only that, she will probably need to undergo medical treatment and surgeries to make her body align with her behaviors, because if she behaves in a way that doesn't fit the stereotypes for somebody with her kind of body, that's so unnatural that she'll probably want to kill herself if she doesn't physically fix it. It's impossible to escape the obvious fact that this is all very regressive and sexist and extremely homophobic. The progressive idea in the ancient world of like 5 years ago was to get rid of the idea that each sex should be forced to behave in a certain way. And now instead we're becoming more obsessed with that than ever. You can find videos online of people saying that they want to raise their child without a gender so they don't dress the baby in blue or pink. Of course, if these people weren't idiots, they would know there's nothing male about blue and nothing female about pink. These are simply symbolic cultural traditions, and they vary with time and place. Barely a century ago in America, it was boys who were dressed in pink. We used to dress both boys and girls when they were babies in gowns that were functional, but today those gowns would probably be considered dresses and they'd be too frilly for boys. But those associations are new and temporary, and in 100 years they'll probably be changed again. They have nothing to do with the person's sex or any type of inner gender identity, and yet we now have people deciding that if children as small as toddlers don't fit these arbitrary aesthetic designations, that means they're actually a different sex. While studies have shown that young kids have a 60 to 90% probability of desisting from saying that they're transgender if they're allowed to just grow out of it, they've also shown that those kids have a much smaller likelihood of desisting if they were socially transitioned at a young age. In other words, if idiot parents have a 2-year-old boy who likes pink t-shirts and they decide that means that now they need to raise him as a girl, there could have been a 90% chance he would have never transitioned into a girl on his own, but because the parents raised him that way and that's how he grew up understanding himself, there's a much higher chance that he will medically transition and end up probably infertile and with a lifetime of medical complications. And when they talk about the 60 to 90% of kids who identify as trans who later desist, since the criteria for identifying them as trans in the first place is just whether they don't conform rigidly to gender stereotypes, obviously many of those desisters end up being gay. And that's where we get to the issue of how this is just erasing gay people. Another thing that Rowling has said that caused controversy is that if we deny that sex is a reality, then there is no same-sex attraction. And she's obviously right. The entire basis for the gay rights movement was that physical attraction between two people of the same sex was a characteristic that couldn't be changed and shouldn't have to be changed. But if we're saying that a person's sex is irrelevant to whether they're male or female, that obviously goes out the window. Lesbians being pressured by TRAs to have sex with people who have penises is another thing that the TRAs like to say literally never happens, but that anybody with internet access can find happening constantly. The idea goes that if gender identity is what determines if somebody is a woman, and a lesbian is a woman who's attracted to women, then if a lesbian says that she's not attracted to trans women, she's saying that they're not really women, and that makes her a bigot and probably an evil TERF.
If you're cis and you won't date trans folks, you're a transphobe. Now if that made you mad, maybe it's your prejudices that you need to probe. No matter the reasons you've got, you're reducing us to when we disrobe. And that kind of thinking ain't sophisticated, it's more like microbes.
YouTuber Riley J. Dennis has just come out with another painfully embarrassing video. It's called Your Dating Preferences Are Discriminatory.
Recently on the internet, there's been a lot of discussion around genital preferences and transphobia. We all have our implicit biases built into our preferences. I'm trying to show that preferences for women with vaginas over women with penises might be partially informed by the influence of a cis-sexist society.
I have lost count of the amount of times these trans activists have called me a vagina fetishist for being a lesbian.
Would you date a trans person, honestly? Well, if you said no, I'm sorry, but that's pretty discriminatory. There was probably a time in my life when I said I wouldn't date a trans person, but since then I've thought critically about it and changed my mind. Because we associate penises with men and vaginas with women, some people think they could never date a trans man with a vagina or a trans woman with a penis. That people are more than their genitals. I think that you could feel attraction to someone without knowing what's between their legs. And if you were to say that you're only attracted to people with vaginas or people with penises, it really feels like you're reducing people just to their genitals. You're kind of objectifying them, but you're thinking of them more as genitals than objects. So I guess you're kind of genitalifying them? My point is, we have implicit biases that we were raised with or that we developed over time, and they can be hard to get rid of. And I think this can be especially prominent within the queer community. Gay men often pride themselves on being disgusted by vaginas, and the same goes for lesbian women with penises. It's difficult because some queer people have built their sexual identities on these repulsions, but I don't think they're innate at all. If you met someone who was extremely attractive, had a great personality, but didn't have the genitals that you wanted, you might be surprised to find that it isn't a deal breaker. But you can unlearn your own prejudices. It just takes time and conscious effort.
If your reason for not dating any transgender person is because of their trans status, that doesn't mean you're not transphobic, because you are. I'm gonna keep on making videos about the cotton ceiling because fuck everybody else.
Tá, vamos terminar.
Hi sperms, hi TikTok. I just wanted to say non-binary lesbians are valid. They can use he him pronouns. Thank you, have a good day.
I know you think you've got good reasons, maybe you do. Trauma's real, it's hard to heal, I'd never say that that isn't true. But transphobia is transphobia, and you won't get a pass when we're through. We're human beings, not sex organs, cis lesbians, I'm talking to you.
You'll get people who will describe.
Gente, isso é uma questão individual, né? Você ficaria com uma pessoa trans. E é uma questão que também não dá nem pra saber. É como essa moça falou aí. Pode ser que algum dia você se apaixone por uma pessoa e descubra que ela não tem as genitais que você achava que ela teria. E aí você vai fazer o quê? Você já tá apaixonado. É lógico que a transfobia estrutural que existe em você vai fazer você achar meio estranho. Mas é muito diferente a gente tratar isso como um preconceito ativo, né? Como eles estão fazendo parecer aí, e não um preconceito estrutural mesmo. Pode ser que realmente essas pessoas que não querem ficar com pessoas trans associem tanto a genitália com a identidade da pessoa que é impossível para elas, e elas têm todo o direito de escolher com quem elas querem ficar. Ou a gente chegou numa época em que agora você é obrigado a ficar com certas pessoas para se colocar politicamente, sabe? Para se provar como não preconceituoso. Não, cada um fica com quem quer. E a pergunta, você ficaria com uma pessoa trans? Já passou pela minha cabeça tantas vezes. E eu acho que a resposta é, não tem como eu saber. Se eu quiser ficar com ela, se eu quiser ficar com uma pessoa, a última coisa que eu vou pensar é, meu Deus, será que ela é trans? Sabe? Isso só vai ser importante ou vai me chamar atenção no momento em que a pessoa se disrobe, como essa moça aí falou. Então, sei lá, é muito complexo. E eu acho muito simplista virar e falar mulheres lésbicas que não ficam com mulheres trans são transfóbicas. Tá, são, mas todos nós somos. Sabe? Não adianta ficar individualizando a questão.
themselves as progressive LGBT activists, saying that there's something wrong with a lesbian because she doesn't like dick. Personally, I'm not attracted to vaginas because of the fact that I'm a gay man. When I say that I'm a gay man, I mean that I'm attracted to people with male bodies. I like dick, but I also like the rest of male bodies, which if you've ever seen one, you'll know are shaped and feel differently than female bodies. When I say I'm gay, I don't mean that I'm attracted to masculine stereotypes or a masculine identity or to how somebody dresses or how they think about themselves. When I say that I'm gay, I'm referring to my sexual orientation, which means that I'm talking about sex, which means that I'm talking about bodies. As somebody who grew up being told these
Eu acho que eu discordo disso. Eu acho que você se atrai por uma gama de coisas que incluem a identidade de gênero, inclui a forma como ela se veste, inclui o corte de cabelo, inclui muitas coisas que não são biológicas, sabe? Basicamente, ser gay é se você se atrair pelo mesmo gênero que você se identifica, sabe? É isso que historicamente ser gay é.
should be ashamed of himself for sexual attractions, and then joined LGBT activist groups to campaign for the right to have those sexual attractions. It's very, very strange to me now that just in the last 5 years or so, it's suddenly those same LGBT activist types who would tell me that there's something wrong with me for liking dick. People like Riley J. Dennis, who was the person in those clips I just showed, talked about the concept of genital preferences, like this is some kind of weird kink that's separate from sexual orientation. I'm not sure how they think they can decouple sex from genitals, but for most of us, genitals are what we use to have sex. Genital preferences and...
Não. Claro que não. Tem pessoas que usam dedos pra fazer sexo, tem pessoas que usam... Gente, tudo que existe no mundo pode ser usado pra fazer sexo. Não é só os genitais.
Sexual orientation are the same thing, unless you're trying to use this new English certain kids on Tumblr have invented where words don't mean anything. So when people like Riley say you can just reconsider your biased genital preferences, what they're saying is exactly what we used to call homophobic bigotry, that if you just kind of try hard enough, you can decide not to be gay. Not only that, but it's desirable to reconsider the fact that you're gay and to choose something else instead, because being gay means that you're a transphobic bigot. They're trying to flip it and say that the anti-gay ones are the progressives and that the gay ones are the bigots. And there's a screaming mob of them online to try and shut you down or ruin your life if you point out that this is insane. One of the most evil ways that I see them trying to flip things like this is in how they've recently tried to appropriate the words conversion therapy. For those old gays like me who remember what the words actually mean, the term conversion therapy used to refer to the really horrific practice of, through electroshock or other various barbaric means, trying to torture gay people into having an aversion to their own sexual desires, and then mislabeling this torture as a kind of treatment. Over recent decades, most intelligent people have come around to realizing that this is horrific, so the term conversion therapy has obvious negative connotations. Understanding the negative connotations and knowing that when most people hear that term now, they know that it refers to something awful, trans activists have tried to appropriate the term to apply it to normal, valid therapy for kids who identify as trans. They use the term conversion therapy to apply to the idea that if a small, very confused and possibly mentally ill child says he wants to cut his dick off because he heard on the internet that it's fun, maybe he should talk to a doctor and make sure that's what he really wants before his dick is in a landfill. They again use the threat of suicide if kids don't immediately get what they want to say that immediate, unquestioning affirmation is the only correct response if a child identifies as trans, because they know full well that many of these kids have mental issues that have nothing to do with being trans, and that they might desist if they had time to think it through. That would be terrible for the umbrella numbers. What they're trying to do is the actual conversion therapy, trying to turn kids who would otherwise probably just be gay into medical patients, and they're appropriating a term for torturing gay people as a scare tactic to do this. Of course, TRAs would deny that what they're doing is homophobic because it's in their interest to convince gay people that they're working towards a common goal, and because they want to get as many people as possible under their umbrella.
Alrighty, everybody, repeat after me. Asexual, pansexual, bisexual, trans people, and non-binary people are 100% valid and definitely part of the LGBTQ community. And if you don't like that, suck my dick.
But like those other...
Gente, o que é essa tendência das pessoas de ficar falando que você é válido, você é válido? Quem é você pra dizer se eu sou válido? Eu quero achar que eu sou válido, não quero que os outros me digam que eu sou válido.
times when I've pointed out them saying something isn't true, anybody with an internet connection can find out that it obviously is true. Even as they'll tell you one moment that it's ridiculous to think that their goals are divergent to the needs of gay people, in the next moment they'll literally say that homophobia is okay. They'll even use the word homophobia. It's okay to them as long as it's directed at quote-unquote cis gay men, because they see cis gay men as having more privilege than trans people, and a hierarchy of supposed privilege is how they create their victim status, where they're always the most oppressed ones, which allows them to claim this victim status even when they're the ones who are being violent. If you haven't seen a true crime series called The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, I wouldn't recommend it to everybody because it's one of the most profoundly disturbing things you'll ever see. But if you want to see the kind of things that can happen to cis gay people, you might check it out. It's about a young boy whose mother and her boyfriend, likely because they suspected that he was gay, spent months systematically torturing him to death, starving him, burning him, forcing him to sit in freezing baths, shooting him with a BB gun, making him eat cat shit and kitty litter, punching him in his face hard enough to fracture his skull. You might think I'm sensationalizing, but actually I'm only listing a small percentage of what they did to him. This isn't some kind of isolated incident either. The show mentions other similar abuse stories of young boys suspected of being gay. It's also not ancient history or a story from some dark cult in the deep south. This happened in sunny, liberal Los Angeles just a few years ago. I also happen to have grown up in sunny, liberal Southern California, and not that long ago either, and even still, I've still been physically attacked simply for holding my boyfriend's hand in public. But in the victimization hierarchy of a certain kind of TRA, cis gay men don't really face any persecution, and they need to shut up and get out of the way. Obviously, the really powerless ones without a voice are the group of people who can compel the entire world to change the meanings of the words man and woman to suit their mercurial emotional states. Since I'm gay, this is where, for me, this stuff starts to get really personal. Who I am shouldn't be relevant to my opinions on this stuff, because an opinion is right or wrong regardless of whose opinion it is. If you have your facts wrong, being gay or trans doesn't make them right. The facts exist independently of your identity.
But a fact on its own doesn't mean very much.
But because I know some people will assume that because I made this video I must be some kind of conservative or even alt-right person, it's relevant to point out that I'm actually
Não, as pessoas vão dizer que você é conservador, alt-right e o inferno todo porque você não está seguindo o protocolo, né? Você entende? Não pode falar sobre isso. É igual a gente aqui, né? A gente gosta de Harry Potter, meu Deus do céu. Isso aí já é uma transgressão inaceitável. Você não pode ser... Você só pode ser líder de uma célula neonazista.
a liberal gay guy who lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've never voted for a Republican in my life. It's funny how if you disagree with trans activist positions on any of this stuff, people will immediately start screeching at you to educate yourself. But of course, given who I am and where I'm from, I've heard so much more about this stuff than anybody could ever reasonably be expected to know. If they think I'm not educated on the subject, then what hope does somebody from Kansas have of ever meeting their standards? That's where it becomes ridiculous to say that this stuff is about being inclusive, when to 99% of the world they're speaking in a private language that everybody else thinks sounds insane. I've been more than educated on this stuff. The fact is, I know way more about it than I want to know, because in the end, the way I feel and the way I
Alok.
think most people
O Alok transicionou, é?
people feel is that a lot of it isn't very interesting. I really give zero fucks about how other people live or dress as long as they're not hurting anybody else. But like I said before with Rowling, the point where this becomes contentious is when the activism is affecting people other than the activists. The whole pronoun game is a good example of this. If somebody decides that they want to call themselves a particular thing, or that they want to make up their own way of speaking where they use words to mean things that they never meant before, I mean, that's their own business. The problem is when they try to force everybody else to speak the way they've decided to speak in their own personal made-up language. How you speak is an issue of personal freedom, but forcing other people to speak how you'd like them to isn't.
These are my pronouns. They are your only options.
Hey, here's an article about people sharing their names and also their pronouns. What's up with that?
You can't always assume a person's gender or pronouns from that person's name or appearance. Those assumptions aren't always right.
So people share their pronouns because you can't always tell by their appearance.
Yeah, and sharing invites other people to share, so you don't have to just guess.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Sharing pronouns is a lot like sharing your name. We expect that people won't guess at our names and make up names for us that we don't want.
So how do you do it?
Do what? Share your pronouns?
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not she, you fucking cunt! I pronounce the name!
Oh, that wasn't so hard.
Hi, my name is Johnny and I use he, him pronouns.
Hi, and I am Conchi and I use she, her pronouns.
Ava.
And we're here to talk about pronouns.
If it's a signal of acceptance and respect, how do we go about creating a safe space for everybody?
Did he grab my camera? He!
Hey, police, I just got spit on.
But what would I do if I misgender someone?
Most people are going to assume that you're one of two genders, a man or a woman, and so every single day you have to be correcting them.
Oh, thank you for telling me that. That is so helpful.
As anybody who speaks English knows, using they as a singular or personal pronoun causes a lot of issues with confusing grammar where the meaning of what you're trying to say and the subject of a sentence become unclear. People will try to, well, actually you, and point out situations where they has been used as a singular pronoun for centuries. And it's true that it has. It's been used that way in particular cases, but obviously not in every case. It's usually used when the subject of what you're
gente, isso
referring
não
to
faz
is
sentido
unknown,
pra
so it
gente, né, que
implies this-
falamos português. E tô achando ele meio conservador linguisticamente.
Very dumb linguistic revisionism, and to accommodate a very small number of people isn't a small thing to ask. It would be a large thing to ask even if it was in service of a noble goal.
When I'm not passing, guys think friendliness means I'm attracted to them.
The science behind sex and gender's correlation is a theory, not a law.
Not trying to be special, not trying to get anyone's attention. I'm gender fluid. It's a thing. Shut the fuck up and leave me alone.
Are you a boy or a girl? Yes.
What does this mean your sexuality is? Well, I guess the word is gynophilic, in that I'm still attracted to feminine presenting people, or I guess more broadly women. But I think the word is gynophilic.
I don't have a name for what it is. In my opinion, gender is a universe. It is a broad spectrum of planets and stars and sky.
Part 3 of the genders that I made specifically for systems.
Yeah, I was about ready to scream at the next person who called me girl.
This is plural fawn, which is the same as plural gender / plural fluid. So again, go back, watch that video. Except in the same way that there's gender fluid, gender fey, and gender fawn.
So apparently my gender confuses people, and I think that's exactly what I want to do. So yes, I'm male and female.
Plural fawn is masculining, which in the context of...
No offense, but if you're a boy and you like me, you are not heterosexual.
This is the flag with meanings. Being a system, dissociation, identity separation, collectively having similar genders, masculine genders and alters with masculine genders, genders that are between...
If we could all just be honest for a minute, we all know that all this neo-pronoun stuff is bullshit. The only thing that non-binary means is that a person doesn't fit exactly into rigid sex stereotypes for either gender, which is fine, but it's obviously sexist as hell to suggest that if you don't fit into a rigid stereotype of a woman, that means that you aren't a real woman. Being a left-wing gay guy who lives where I do, a few years ago when this stuff started to gain traction, without learning about it much, I originally thought, sure, of course, I support however people want to express their gender. I really don't care. But I was also assuming that since people were so serious about it, there must be some kind of academic or scientific basis to it that supported it. It didn't occur to me at first that it was simply embracing stereotypes that men must behave one way and women must behave another way, and that if you didn't behave in one of those two ways, then that means that you aren't a man or a woman. That idea is so silly that you assume that there must be something else going on here, but there really isn't. This is another area where if you don't agree with them on this, you'll be told you need to educate yourself. But again, it's a tedious topic about which most people have already learned more than they ever need to know. At this point, probably about half of my ex-boyfriends have recently decided that there's some variety of non-binary. Personally, I prefer guys that are what you might consider on the more feminine side, since I'm gay and those ones are usually gay. I also have what you might call a character flaw where I'll almost always be attracted to a hot guy over an intelligent guy. So if you put those two things together, it explains why most of my relationships haven't lasted very long, and it also explains why I dated a number of the types of guys who would suddenly decide that they're non-binary when it becomes trendy.
Não, existem muitos estudos na teoria queer que falam sobre esse assunto, né? Ele falou, pelo que eu entendi, ele tá falando que não existem. Ele tá simplesmente errado ou mentindo.
You're braver than I thought.
The point of mentioning all of this is that I'm not looking at this in a hypothetical way or from a position of ignorance. I know plenty of people who would tell you that they're non-binary. I've had intimate relationships with them. I've lived with them. That's how I know who they are and what they mean when they choose that label. And all that it means is that they're men who don't conform to a strict masculine stereotype. And obviously that's fine. Guys like that are the kind of guys that I like. I don't have any interest in macho guys or traditionally masculine guys. I find gay guys trying to imitate straight guys to be really tedious. I don't have any problem with guys who don't conform to masculine stereotypes. I just have a problem with the really sexist and homophobic idea that not conforming to those stereotypes means that they're not really men.
With the MBs, with the MBs, with the MBs. Nobody at school understands non-binary and therefore everybody uses every pronoun, including it. With the NBs, with the NBs, with the NBs.
Say a little bit about yourself. What does it mean to be gender non-binary?
Sure. Well, for me, it means that I don't really identify as a man or a woman. It's somewhere in the middle, but where in the middle depends on the day. Some days I, err more towards the feminine side, or I like to present more femininely. But there are other days where I fall more in the middle and a little more on the androgynous side. Like, for example, today I have men's pants on, but I also have my hair and makeup done. So
it gives me the freedom to express myself. If I wake up one day and I want to spike my hair and do punk rock makeup, I can do it.
With the NBs, with the NBs, with the NBs.
There is no one way to be non-binary. You could go to another non-binary person, ask them how they knew they were non-binary, and they could give you a completely different story to what I'm going to give you.
That I am both a man and a woman, and neither a man or a woman.
Okay, boomer.
With the NBs, with the NBs, with the NBs.
Let your own pride flag fly! Not binary!
With the NBs, with the NBs, with the NBs.
I identified as a cis gay male. I saw myself as a cis man and just thought, well, I paint my nails and I wear lipstick, but I'm a cis man.
With the NBs, with the NBs, with the NBs.
Just because I may present more femme doesn't mean that I'm any less they, them.
Non-binary people don't owe you androgyny. They can present however they want. Respect their fucking pronouns.
This is what I looked like before I started doing TikTok, and this is what I look like now. So obviously this app kind of fucked me up.
People just think that I'm a girl who changed their name to Toby, and it's kind of shit. I'm not gonna lie. With the NBs, with the NBs, with the NBs.
People been asking me lately, are you a boy or a girl? And I'm like, dude, can't I just be a piece of shit?
The purpose of the whole pronoun game.
Olha, gente, na minha concepção, existem muito mais pessoas não binárias no mundo do que binárias, porque quais são os estereótipos que a gente tá esperando, sabe, das pessoas? E eu acho que todo mundo, pelo menos em algum momento na vida, vai sair disso. E com base no que eu li da Judith Butler, que é quem fala bastante sobre esse assunto, inclusive se identifica como não binário, todo mundo pode ser considerado não binário. Porque a binariedade, ela é realmente uma descrição muito fechada, né? Então, sei lá, eu acho que tá ok você se identificar como não binário. Eu me identifico como não binário, porque eu sei que muita gente na rua, quando me vê, quando quando conversa comigo, não enxerga o homem, sabe? Eu sinto isso. E desde criança. E pra mim isso é uma descrição do que a Judith Butler chama de não binário. Mas ao mesmo tempo eu me sinto meio mal de ficar de pegar esse nome pra mim, justamente porque parece que pra essas pessoas que fazem esses TikToks aí que apareceram aí, parece ser uma coisa tão certeira, tão óbvia, que você já sabe desde que você era criança, que é uma coisa tão escrita em pedra, assim, e eu não me sinto assim nunca. Então, é difícil pra mim afirmar. Mas eu acho que toda pessoa homossexual é não binária, porque ela é, realmente, porque o sexo com o mesmo gênero não é considerado parte do padrão sexual, né? Do homem e da mulher, então...
isn't really to respect anybody, but rather it's sort of a loyalty test. If somebody is willing to recite the correct mantra, it's a signal that they're going to bow down before the cult doctrine and define words how they're instructed to by the hive mind. There's a script you're supposed to follow, and you gain social currency by showing you know and embrace the correct and current lingo.
Trans women are women.
Trans women are women! Trans women are women! Trans women are women! Trans women are women!
Okay.
Trans women are women! Trans women are...
Say the line, Bart!
Peguei a referência. Twitter tem que acabar, gente.
The ironic
É isso.
thing about gay people going after Rowling over all of this is that she's been vocally pro-gay all along, even back when it could have done real damage to her career. Remember that for 2 decades, it was conservatives who were burning her books. To justify how they've turned on her, gay people invent this imaginary narrative that she suddenly changed when the opposite is actually true.
I can't wrap my head around how all of this happened. Honestly, how this woman who wrote books that defined my adolescence and adolescences of queer people around the world became so toxic.
The liberal J.K. Rowling, the
Será que ela virou tóxica ou é vocês que estão interpretando de uma forma hiperbólica demais e não estão conseguindo enxergar as nuances, sabe? Da pessoa e do que ela fala.
world thought they knew up until 2019 has been replaced with an obsessive, hateful fearmonger.
How did she so quickly go from being the author held up by millions as an example of wokeness to this?
Rowling didn't really change at all. What happened is that the gay movement embraced a fringe element, and they're the ones who completely reversed their own stance on key issues all in the last few years, and then they get mad when certain people remember their own principles and decide to stand by them. Trying to get everybody under that umbrella, TRAs try to convince gay people and intersex people and anybody else that they can think of that we're all fighting for a common cause, and to expect you to forget what you used to think. On the whole issue of quote-unquote genital preferences, I've had TRAs tell me that, well, they suppose it's all right if I'm only attracted to people with penises, but that I really just shouldn't go around saying that because it might hurt a trans person's feelings.
And the last thing I want to say about this is that if you'd rather not have sex with a woman who has a penis, maybe just don't make such a huge deal of it. Trans women are often afraid of not being found attractive or desirable after coming out, and you're not helping. If you really want to be an ally to trans people, you could just not talk about it. You have the freedom to say whatever you want. I'm just asking you to consider if it's necessary to say those things when they reflect harmful or violent rhetoric.
Nossa, gente, precisa alguém mandar você fazer uma coisa que obviamente pode magoar a outra? Pelo amor de Deus, os americanos estão precisando de guia de sobrevivência assim, nesse nível?
Because if you have an opinion that you know is only going to make people feel bad about themselves, why constantly share it with the world?
What an asshole.
For one thing, it's insanely narcissistic to expect everybody in the world not to talk about their sexual attractions just because trans people's egos are too fragile to deal with it if every single person they meet isn't sexually attracted to them. But besides that, if you've dealt with gay rights stuff for a while, this whole line of reasoning will sound eerily familiar to you. It wasn't that long ago that it used to be right-wing homophobes trying to appear tolerant who would tell you, well, we don't care what you do in the privacy of your own bedroom, just don't rub it in our faces. Now I'm hearing that exact same thing from people claiming to be pro-LGBT activists. That line of thinking reduces your sexuality to just the act of fucking, as opposed to being a part of your whole life. It says that being gay is just something shameful that you do for a few minutes at a time in a bathhouse or with somebody you got dick pics from on an app. It discounts the whole possibility that your romantic partners aren't just fuck toys, but they're people you share your whole life with. They're not just somebody you're with in the bedroom, they're somebody you go to movies with, somebody you shop with, somebody who will come to the hospital when you're sick. It discounts the possibility that your relationships are real in the same way that every straight person takes for granted that their relationships are. Telling people that they can rethink their sexual orientation, that their genital preferences are just a kink that they can choose to change, is of course exactly what homophobic people used to say to justify conversion therapy. And again, now it's people who claim to be progressive LGBT activists telling us that. I care about these issues not because I'm a conservative or reactionary, but because I'm the opposite. I care about them because I'm a Democrat and I'd like Democrats to win elections before our democracy is gone. I care about how gender ideology affects causes that lump the LGB in with a T because they're taking a gay rights movement that was successful until recently, that was making real progress, and they're letting a small fringe element take over and turn the whole thing into a fucking clown show. Trans people should be concerned with this too, because a small subsection of them, by overreaching, are losing the goodwill of the general population for all of them. Things like the recent Don't Say Gay bills in Florida and other states are the direct result of this. The idea of prohibiting talking about gay issues in classrooms wouldn't have gained much traction if it was just Billy casually mentioning that he has two dads. But when it's teachers telling Billy that if he plays with the doll, that means he's actually a girl and they're going to socially transition him, put him on a path to medicalization, hide it all from his parents, and that if he doesn't cut off his dick when he's a teenager, he'll probably kill himself. When it's that kind of stuff going on, parents have every right to be concerned.
The goal of the transition closet is for our students to be able to wear the clothes that their parents approve of, come to school, and then swap out into the clothes that fit who they truly are.
One of my students felt safe enough to share his pronouns with me. And when he did so, once the class knew that I knew, they all switched pronouns. They're second graders.
I'm a non-binary elementary school teacher, so here's how I talk to my students about pronouns and such. See, I'm not a Mr. or a Miss, so I go by Mix because that's what makes me happy. You have a new name? Well, yes, it's a name that makes me a lot happier, and that's why I changed it. I like your new name. I do too, but it's nice to know I have your approval. Mix? You mean like mixing you up like cookie dough? My pronouns are they, them, and she, her. Thank you so much for asking. What are yours? Excuse me, Miss K, I need... It's Mix K! Now, I don't consider myself to be a boy or a girl. I just see myself as a person. You guys are 5th grade, so I feel like I can tell you this a little bit more. My new name is going to be Mix K, and I go by they and she pronouns. Yay! Woo!
And I use the idea that this is like Superman changing in a phone booth. But that idea actually goes a lot further than that, because Superman isn't Clark Kent. Clark Kent is actually the disguise. And when Clark Kent goes into the phone booth, he transforms into Superman, who's really just who he truly is, Kal-El. And so this gives our trans students the opportunity to be the superheroes that we know they are.
And then when the parents react to things like that, gay people who weren't harming anybody lose their rights along with the extremists. The narcissists and extremists are sinking the ship and they're taking the rest of us down with them. Every time they post a crazy TikTok with their bullshit, they think that they're schooling the other side, and what they're actually doing is handing more votes to reactionary Republicans. Both the ACLU and Stonewall used to be important civil rights organizations, and they've now both been gutted from within. What happens is that the extreme TRAs take advantage of the good inclination that people have to be accepting and inclusive, and in both cases that's why these organizations hired TRAs to represent those views. But if the views of the extremists are at cross purposes to the views of the organization, as soon as they're in there, they'll start gutting the place to remake it in their own image. Both a founding member of Stonewall and a former leader of the ACLU have said recently that the organizations are now acting contrary to their original intended missions.
You were head of this organization, excuse me, for 25 years almost. It's changing. I mean, it was a stalwart defender of free speech and civil liberties. Is it still that?
Not as much. I mean, they just produced a couple of years ago new guidelines for their lawyers to use when deciding what free speech cases to take. That before they take a case defending someone's free speech, they have to make sure that the speech doesn't offend or threaten other civil liberties values. In other words, before they're going to defend your free speech, they want to see what you say.
People say the word gatekeeping as though it's a bad thing because, of course, you would think that inclusion is a good thing, especially in something like an LGBT organization whose mission is to include and represent the marginalized. But if we really want progress for gay people and for trans people, at some point we're going to have to realize that some gatekeeping is necessary. If you try to include absolutely everybody, that means also including some crazy people and some people that are hostile to your own interests. And what we've seen in recent years is that the crazy people, of course, have the loudest voices, and they end up shouting over everybody else. Then, for people on the outside, isn't it understandable that they think that the whole fucking thing must be crazy? When you see somebody that's being ridiculous or even dangerous, and then also trying to paint themselves as being part of the same cause as you are, you need to say that they don't represent you.
And this anger and vitriol towards us will eventually swallow her up. Her actions have essentially polluted and permanently tarnished her career. It is just a fact that she has permanently damaged her reputation. Her transphobic tirade has completely soiled both her as a person and the work that was so beloved. The world sees her as changed, and she will continue to be defined by her recent actions until she is completely consumed by her own hatred.
Another really childish idea people have about J.K. Rowling is that her opinions on these topics would or should or even could destroy the legacy of her writing. A lot of the problems with how people relate to this whole thing come from their inability to separate their relationship to the book from their relationship to its author. I've had people tell me that artists work in the service industry and that it's their job to do what their fans want them to do, which makes me absolutely livid. No decent art has ever been made by somebody who thinks that way, and fans that think that way are trying to bring everything down there to their own illiterate level. But that's why people think that they have a right to police what J.K. Rowling writes in her books and what she says about her own imaginary world. It's a short step from there to thinking that they also have a right to police what she says about politics in the real world. Even if she was wrong about all these things, which she usually isn't if you bother to pay attention to what she said, whether she's right or wrong doesn't make the way fans react to it any less ridiculous. It's completely nuts to expect that just because you like an artist's work, you'll agree with all the opinions that she has in her life. Buying a Harry Potter book gives a fan absolutely no right to think that they should be able to police her opinions. Your life has really taken a wrong turn if you're bothered by the fact that an author that you don't know doesn't agree with you on absolutely everything. But the idea goes that since she's a famous person and a wealthy person, if you buy her books, then you're somehow increasing the ability of her opinions to influence other people.
There is a difference between a dead author that maybe has a checkered past and a living one who is using their not inconsiderable wealth and power to advocate against marginalized groups. Rowling only has this massive platform because of her influence, which comes from her creative output. From an ethical standpoint, if you really don't want to support the author, you might just need to let Harry Potter go. So I know that this kind of comes off like I'm saying boycott Harry Potter because the author has some bad Twitter opinions, but I think that if this is an issue that you really care about, you kind of have to.
Of course, the vast majority of people don't know or don't care about the little online gender dramas surrounding her, and it won't influence whether people buy her books, and it also won't influence their opinion on those topics. The people bragging online that they're boycotting her work already bought a set of Harry Potter books decades ago, and them not buying more isn't going to have any effect on the fact that she's still very wealthy and can spend her money however she chooses. Their boycott isn't really serving any purpose other than to make themselves feel important and to virtue signal to their little group of friends that already agrees with with them. But supposing that they did actually have the ability to impact her finances, what would the result really be? Where are all these anti-trans causes that she's supposedly giving money to? Do they really think that she's spending a bunch of cash on some kind of trans genocide fund? If you want to find out what she's spending her money on, there's lots of information publicly available.
Her charitable donations over the years have reached at least $150 million. Rowling founded the Anne Rowling Regenerative Neurology Clinic at the University of Edinburgh with a $16 million contribution. She's founded an international children's rights organization, the Loomis Foundation, as well as the Volant Charitable Trust to alleviate social deprivation across Scotland.
She's always donated vast.
Inclusive mulheres trans são atendidas pela Volant, coisa que as pessoas não vão gostar de falar, mas é uma realidade.
Sums of money to worthy causes, mostly helping children in need. Recently, she's donated millions to helping children in Ukraine while the country is under attack. If you really think that you deciding not to buy a Harry Potter book will make a change in her ability to fund causes that she supports, which it doesn't, then the cause you're taking money away from is helpless kids who need support, and you're doing it because you think that your need for a stranger to validate your inner gender identity is more important than kids being bombed in a war.
Ai.
Has never had much to do with J.K. Rowling. She's a litmus test onto which people can project their own issues. She's anti-Semitic, she's too pro-Israel, she's fatphobic, she's homophobic, she's transphobic. She's whatever trendy word it is that somebody knows will generate them a lot of likes from their followers if they use that word on Twitter. In absence of her actually saying anything, people will just make things up.
And it's of my opinion that she will probably either sink fully into the depths of right-wing white nationalist conservatism beyond just hating trans people until she's completely unrecognizable, or honestly she could just straight up vanish from the public eye entirely and blame it on being canceled.
That's right. Rowling, who has had left-of-center views on every topic that she's ever spoken on, and who's made racial purity the motivations of the bad guys in everything she's ever written, is now suddenly going to become a far-right white supremacist just because this person is running out of things to justify throwing hyperbolic invective at her.
So I think that part of the reason why there are a lot of really confused emotions about J.K. Rowling going hard turf is because so many people have an attachment to Harry Potter. It was a part of their childhood. It was a part of their adolescence. It is deeply, deeply important to some people.
Because for many of us, Harry Potter represents something more than just a book we read as kids or teens. It became a part of our identity because it exists in a very rarefied place of cultural importance. Formative literature. The point is that I'm getting so flustered over this, not because I'm putting on airs, but because I've kind of taken it personally. I have Slytherin and Ravenclaw scarves, and this past winter, on the very rare occasion I got to leave the house, I felt like I couldn't wear them. Can I still read the books, watch the movies, play the video game, buy Lego?
Pode, moço, pelo amor de Deus.
What about my Hogwarts backpack? Can I still use that without feeling like I'm promoting TERF ideology?
The reason that it bothers people like that so much when Rowling doesn't agree with them is that they've invested so much of their lives into valuing fantasy over reality, and the Harry Potter books are one of the fantasy places that they like to go live in. So when the author of those books threatens to burst their bubble, the threat is coming from inside their closed little ecosystem that they thought was supposed to wall out threats. In these videos of people crying about Rowling being the supreme bigot, you'll notice that a lot of them are also wearing Hogwarts robes or sitting in front of a few $1,000s worth of Harry Potter Legos. People think that Rowling is a threat for the same reason that they think that they're cat gender, or that wearing nail polish sometimes means that they aren't a boy. But over here in reality, where these issues are actually important and a lot of them have a real impact on real people, we're eventually going to have to start dealing with things as they are, and not just how people would like them to be.
Gente, olha essa opinião.
Hi, my name is Erin. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm
O gato transfóbico. É, gente, assim. Esse cara tá bem. Esse cara tá bem, assim, arrogante, né, com as suas opiniões. Então parece que ele tem bastante certeza no que ele acredita, nos pontos que ele acha que devem ser passados, mas no meu caso não sou assim, né? Eu tenho muitas dúvidas, e além das dúvidas, tem esse apego emocional com a série de livros, com as coisas que eu aprendi com os livros, com a minha história, com os livros, com as pessoas que eu conheci por causa dos livros. Então tudo isso complica um pouco, né? A gente chegar a alguma conclusão. Além de que eu tenho uma relação com a J.K. Rowling histórica que é muito forte. Ela, sei lá, já subiu, já desceu, mas ela continua sendo uma pessoa que foi muito importante para minha vida e que eu admiro muito. Até mesmo se ela tiver errada, eu continuo admirando, porque é uma pessoa com princípios, né? Que não desce do, do salto em que ela decidiu subir. E eu acho impressionante. Hoje em dia, quando as pessoas cometem qualquer errinho, elas já vão fazer um pronunciamento pedindo desculpa no Instagram. Ela ser dessa forma, lutar, continuar acreditando no que ela acredita, mesmo depois de tantos ataques, de tanta virulência que ela sofreu até ameaças de violência física mesmo, né? Eu acho impressionante. Mas dizer isso é considerado transfobia por associação, né? Porque se eu não queimo os meus livros de Harry Potter, se eu não digo que ela é a pior pessoa do mundo, significa que eu sou também transfóbico. Mesmo eu gostando muito do assunto, me identificando até como não binário, eu sou transfóbico. E eu deveria conversar com uma pessoa trans. E aí, se eu vou conversar com uma pessoa trans que concorda com a J.K. Rowling, não vale. Tem que ser uma pessoa trans que não concorda. São tantas coisas, né, que a gente vai ficando pensando com o tempo, vivendo nas redes sociais, principalmente no Twitter. E vira tudo uma grande bagunça, né? Mas eu acho que a gente precisa fugir das individualizações e das culpabilizações que as pessoas tentam colocar nas nossas costas. Você tem direito de sair com o casaco de Hogwarts, você tem direito de assistir Harry Potter, de ler Harry Potter, você tem o direito de fazer tudo isso, e isso não significa absolutamente nada, mesmo que você discorde de absolutamente tudo que a J.K. Rowling falou. Não existe nenhum dispositivo que mata 50 pessoas trans quando você lê Harry Potter, sabe? É, é, a gente vive com tantas contradições nesse mundo. A gente compra roupa onde a gente não sabe como que as pessoas que trabalham lá são tratadas. A gente compra comida onde a gente não sabe como que os animais que foram usados para fazer essa comida são tratados. A gente vive com tantas contradições. O que é mais uma contradição? Por que que a transfobia deve ser levada com tanta seriedade assim, a mais do que, sei lá, os problemas do capitalismo? Não deve, é por causa dessa hipérbole que as pessoas criaram com esse assunto, que as pessoas se sentem de verdade culpadas. Que nem esse cara falou de sair com mochila de Hogwarts, gente. Não. Sabe, calma, tá tudo bem, tá? A J.K. Rowling não está financiando instituições transfóbicas, como as pessoas falam. Não existe nenhuma evidência para isso. Se você tiver, pode mandar aí. E tá tudo bem. Pode comprar Hogwarts Legacy, jogar. Tá tudo bem. E se você vê gente falando mal da J.K. Rowling no Twitter, simplesmente ignora, porque isso aí virou tema pra ganhar like. As pessoas estão Tem influencer aí especialista em falar em J.K. Rowling. Que não é fã, especialista em odiar J.K. Rowling. A gente simplesmente tem que ignorar. E continuar vivendo a nossa vida do jeito que a gente se sente confortável que é. Se você sabe que você não é transfóbico, você sabe que você aceita a existência de pessoas trans do jeito que elas querem ser, tá bom. E não é na internet que a gente vai mudar o mundo. Infelizmente, a internet, gente, sinto informar, mas deu errado, deu ruim. A gente vai ter que continuar mudando o mundo pelo mundo real mesmo. Mas enfim, já tô começando a ficar com a garganta seca e perdendo as linhas dos raciocínios. Então, muito obrigado a quem assistiu, apesar que o pessoal sumiu do chat. E vamos tentar marcar aquela assistida do vídeo da Nathalie, vai ser top. Beijinhos e deixem os comentários aí de vocês sobre o que vocês acharam.